What? You know what? Just to be safe, thing you did end up saving your later. I was at a sleepover as a kid. I was a little worried because my mom had been oddly tired earlier that day. I went home early because I was worried. By the end of the night, I, 14 at the time, had to call an ambulance for my mom, as she was having problems with her heart, and I was the only one there with her. She was incapable of forming coherent sentences and would probably not have gotten the help she needed if I wasn't there. So, good thing I was. Learned CPR and first aid. Had to give CPR to a family friend when she collapsed from a heart attack, and thankfully, she was brought back after being down for 15 minutes. She only had minor memory problems and mostly just couldn't remember that day. She's still here and kicking years later. Was delivering pizza in a sketchy block of town late at night. Huge apartment complex with multiple buildings. Walking up to the front door, I noticed a couple guys wearing dark clothing about 100 feet behind me walking in my direction. Delivery was on the second floor, and by the time I reached her door, I heard the main door of the apartment complex open and close. She used to CC for the order and tipped in cash. So when I was putting the receipt into my bag where I kept my cash, I actually pulled the rest of the cash out and stuffed it into my inner jacket pocket just to be safe, leaving just the change I had that night in the bag. Started to head down the stairs back out to my car, and two guys jumped out from behind the stairs, and the one had a gun pointed at me and told me to give them the money. I quickly handed them my bag filled with quarters, and they took off towards the back entrance of the apartment complex. I never ran so fast in my life. Back to my car, I wanted to make sure I was as far away as possible before they realized they robbed me of $3.5 in quarters. Was on a side-by-side vehicle mudding on some property a friend and I were visiting. Mid-ride, I turn to my friend and say, "Hey, you should probably buckle your seatbelt, just in case." Not 1 minute later did he lose control and slide front first into a tree, going about as fast as this thing could go given the conditions. Both of us were okay, but the side-by-side was completely ruined. He looked at me right after, and his eyes were as big as dinner plates. I dropped my high school girlfriend off. Then for some reason, I locked the passenger door. Not 10 minutes later, I was stopped at a red light, and some scummy-looking dude tried to open up the door. I have no idea why I locked that door after she got out. I really didn't have a habit of that. No idea what would have happened if that guy got in my truck. Driving along highway, and get a bad feeling with drivers ahead of me tailgating back to back at 70 miles per hour. I switch lanes to be safe, and get further clearance. Not 2 seconds later, one of the cars ahead slams on their brakes. Looked like no ducking reason. And the cars in my previous lane slam into each other. And one car that was behind me slams into all of them full blast. Cars go flying into the air Hollywood style, flipping up nearly vertical before slamming back down. I'd probably be dead or have a lifelong disability if I hadn't moved. Avoid dumb drivers, kids. Keep safe distances and buffers whenever possible. My dad lost his glasses once. He was going to just use his old prescription, but last minute decided to just go to the optometrist anyway in case something changed. Turns out, he had a tear in his retina and was booked for surgery within 24 hours. It was bad enough, they said. He probably would have gone blind really soon had they not caught it. When then did. My stomach had some issues, and my doctor sent me for a colonoscopy just to get things checked out. They found one polyp, no big deal, not related to the current problem, and told me to come back in 5 years just in case. I put a Google reminder and forgot about it. 5 years later, I went for the colonoscopy, and they found a lot more, and said I would have ended up with cancer in 5 to 20 years for sure had I not gone. Instead, they removed all polyps, and now I'm regularly going to colonoscopies due to having a syndrome they identified. I'm far away from the age where you normally get a colonoscopy, so I would definitely have got cancer. When you are eligible, or if it is recommended, get a colonoscopy. $5 breakage insurance on a rental surfboard. Broke that ducker clean in half in my first 10 minutes. Not my A, but I was getting ready for school whilst Mum was vomiting in the bathroom. She said it was just a stomach bug and to just go to school, but mentioned her arm hurt. Something didn't sit right, so I called the ambulance from downstairs. They arrived and took her into the ambulance. She then proceeded to have 3 cardiac arrests and needed defibrillated each time. A double bypass later, and she was up and about within a month. Paramedics told me she would have died 5 minutes after I left if I hadn't called. Snow chains at the bottom of the mountain. A bunch of cars passed me on a clear road on the way up with several warnings all the way up. I saw a local throwing on chains with no snow in the area. I decided to be safe and put them on. 30 minutes later, I was in one of the worst snow driving conditions I've ever seen. Whiteout conditions in a snowstorm that eventually resulted in the complete shutdown of the roads. I passed car crash after car crash with just enough traction to feel somewhat comfortable moving 15 miles an hour. Anyone heading to Tahoe needs chains. And chains that fit. Don't duck around. I don't care if you have a 4-wheel drive. Driving through Tahoe and Mammoth during snowstorms is no joke. Literally sunny with no clouds to blinding white darkness in an hour. Might sound ridiculous, but many years ago, when I did my mandatory community service was a thing in Germany as a counterpart to mandatory military service. There was a particular day in a pretty harsh winter. I usually went to work with my bike, as the streets were cleared of snow and ice. Anyway, at this day, I didn't take my helmet off, because when I arrived at the place I worked, I immediately started to shovel snow and didn't even walk inside first. My workplace was a huge and old 4-story hostel in the woods. The roof was packed with snow, and there were massive icicles hanging from the gutters. When a coworker asked me why I decided to look like an idiot with my helmet on, I jokingly replied it was for serious security reasons. A few moments later, an icicle block fell down and hit me on the head and the shoulders. The impact was so brutal that it made me fall down on my knees. Shoulders were bruised, but my head was fine. I really don't know what could have happened if I didn't wear my stupid bicycle helmet for fun that morning. Serious injury for sure. Had some weird achy symptoms and went to the doctor even though I figured I was probably overreacting. Turns out I had cancer. One day, I was attempting to make carioca for the first time, a kind of Filipino fried mochi, and after I popped them in the oil, I settled in and watched them carefully. I never wear an apron whilst cooking, but for some reason I figured, why not this time? And as soon as I stepped out of range of the fryer, they all exploded. Turns out, carioca can form an impermeable shell when fried, so pressure built up inside until they popped and sprayed hot oil all over the kitchen. Of course, I was safely away, reaching for an apron, and was completely dumbfounded. Made sure to punch some holes in all subsequent batches. Of course, once I cleaned the kitchen, I ate them, and they were delicious. 10/10, highly recommend. Was watching my toddler nephew and he'd found a metal straw somewhere in the house and started playing with it. He was just tapping stuff and waving it around. But I just read a story on Reddit about a woman who got completely ducked up by a metal straw when she fell and it impaled her face. So I took the metal one from nephew and gave him a soft, squishy silicone one to play with instead. I'm not exaggerating when I say less than 5 minutes later, he fell like toddlers do, and I saw the silicone straw all smushed into his cheek. I had to just sit for a while after that. Lol. On a road trip with my siblings and dad in Latin America, he lived there and we were visiting. On a highway at night, with clouds, no moon, and no lights. This was a new highway that nobody likes taking now, as criminals often leave glass or spikes to puncture tires and rob you, or worse. We were driving, and this guy was pulled over and waving for help. My dad stopped behind and the guy was scared and asked if we could light up his car while he changed a flat tire. He was terrified of being out where alone, and rightfully so. Dad goes to get out to help, and my sister grabbed him and said she didn't think this felt right. Dad assured us it was fine and almost got out, but sister grabbed him again. Right then, car flew by the door right where he would have been. 4 guys jump out. One grabs the man, puts a gun to his head, and the others sprint to our car. There was a brief chase down the highway, but luckily their old Corolla didn't keep up with our Jeep, and they gave up after 2-3 minutes of driving 170 kilometers per hour. My sister saved my dad's life, and probably ours, by making him stay in the car that extra few seconds. I once subcultured a master culture which was used in a very important research study. We were specifically told not to do that because of patent liabilities. But still, I had a gut feeling that we were going to need another plate culture. And lo and behold, a student accidentally dropped the plate in a lab, and it shattered. Normally, pretty impressionable and caved to peer pressure, but this one time when I was younger, I was hanging with my friends and a couple of older high school guys I'd only met that day. The girls were all fawning over them, but I could tell they were idiots. When they all wanted to go for a drive with the guys, I thought, nah, I don't trust these guys, and I think it's best I just call my parents and go home. I got a call the next morning from one of the girls who was passenger. One of the high school boys was driving. They'd had a serious crash, and one of the girls wasn't wearing her seatbelt and hit her head on the dash and was in a coma for 6 months. She was in intensive care and rehabilitation for years. Still can't believe of all the days I decided not to go with the flow. It probably saved my life. Terribly sad about my friend. We were really close, but she never came right, and her personality changed. I still wonder how successful she might have been, and if we'd still be friends if that hadn't happened to her. Really sad. 3 older kids were going out drinking one night, and my girlfriend invited me to go with them. I decided to stay home that night. They went drinking and driving. They crashed around midnight in the middle of winter. My girlfriend was laying in the snow for 8+ hours until she was found by a bus driver. She was paralyzed from the waist down. The 2 guys were killed in the crash. Very graphic scene, very awful deaths. Never, ever drink and drive. Leaving a spare set of keys at the pub that I live above. Went out on St. Patrick's Day and had my coat stolen. I keep my keys in my coat. At 3 in the morning, had genuinely no idea how I would have been able to get home otherwise. Definitely not some big life-saving moment or anything, but it was a relief, lol. Filling up my ridiculously large 2.5-liter water bottle yesterday. A pipe burst in my building last night, and we still don't have running water 20 hours later, but I still have my bottle. Make sure you have an emergency supply of water in your house. I had a female patient coming for I-131 therapy. Patient must be not pregnant, and to make sure, we do a blood test 1 day prior to dosing. I checked the results on screen. That was negative. I printed it out and put it in the patient file, just in case, although we went paperless years earlier. After giving her radiation safety instructions and discharging her, she came a couple of days saying that she was late. The doctor inserted another pregnancy blood test and came out positive. The lab technician went to the previous negative blood test and changed it to positive. Haven't I printed the test? It would look like I dosed the patient while pregnant and could get fired. Staff before this incident used to make fun of me being paranoid. After this incident, everyone started printing the results. Grabbed a helmet when riding a bike down a steep hill as a kid. Normally didn't, but I ended up falling at top speed and breaking my helmet and chipping 3 teeth. Could have been my head that was broken. I had gallbladder pain on and off. One day I decided I should get it checked. GP gave me antacids and sent me for an U or S just in case. No gallstones, but they found a 4 centimeters tumor on my left kidney. Cancer. Got the kidney whipped out. No metastases. Thanks to my GP for listening. Just hit 14 years free, and I still have gallbladder pain on and off. Years ago, bought a Quicklot bandage military grade for gunshot wounds, bleeding arteries, etc. because for $20 bucks, why not? Never used one, even though they have to be replaced every so often. But when a friend's father had a minor stroke, with little real damage, I mentioned it and recommended she get him one because he'd be on blood thinners. Few months later, I get an email out of the blue from her with the subject "Thank you." He'd been cutting up fruit for breakfast one morning and dropped the knife on his foot. They lived way out in the burbs and were something like 45 minutes away from a hospital, and with morning commuter traffic it would have been longer. No fun any which way, and not too serious a cut, but it would not stop bleeding, so his wife slapped the Quicklot on. It stopped bleeding almost immediately, and she drove him to the hospital for removal and treatment. An embarrassing ouchie could have been much worse. During a hurricane, I realized the street was flooding, so I figured I should move my car farther up the driveway. On my way out, I had the sudden urge to poop, so just to be safe, I stopped by the bathroom first. Maybe 30 seconds later, boom, neighbor's tree fell directly on my car, crushing it. Once before we left for a 2-week vacation, my husband decided to turn off the water and drain the faucets and stuff. I thought he was being silly, but the power went out while we were gone, and everything froze. He likely saved our house and everything in it from burst pipes and flooding. As a teenager, a friend of mine managed to lift a set of keys to a new car on a dealership lot. We were all super excited to go there that night and take that new car for a spin. At the last moment, I thought of how disappointed my mom would be and backed out. That night, during the joyride, they got into a high-speed chase with a couple of cop cars, took an intersection at 85 miles per hour against traffic, and were spun into a brick wall after an initial collision with a garbage truck. The driver was killed 17, and my 2 other friends suffered critical injuries and were hospitalized for weeks. No doubt in my mind that I would have been injured or killed as well. Worked alone in a gambling or video poker place. Closing. Strange guy came in and started making small talk with me. I was expected to be kind and friendly to everybody who came in, so I was doing that. I decided to send a message to my boyfriend and a friend, and then something in me told me to take a picture of the guy as he moved closer to the counter. I was behind. I snuck one real quick and sent it to said friend since she was awake. She called me immediately as she drove the 20 minutes to my job, an hour before I got off. I'll add, I didn't drive, so I had no vehicle in the now abandoned parking lot, the only car being his, which was conveniently backed in, right next to front door. 2 days later, there was a missing persons report released of someone who was a very familiar build and features that I have and suspected trafficking in the area. She went missing later that same night. He left after my friend showed up. I've never had such an uneasy feeling in my life, and I truly think sending those messages are what saved my life. He was waiting for me to get off work at a MR hours were right on the front door. Lived in Baltimore at the time. Pulled up outside my place after getting off a late shift and had to get a backpack out of my trunk before going in. I noticed a group of teenage kids hanging out on the corner and thought, nope. Called my roommate to come watch me walk to the door. About 10 minutes later, a girl comes running down the street bleeding, saying she got jumped by the group of kids for no reason. Stay alert out there, y'all.